Welcome to Education Matters presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm Public School Forum Board Chair Bill Harrison, here to welcome you back to school and back to our show. This school year, Education Matters will feature various faces from the Forum team, including directors, staff members, and some of my colleagues on the board. We look forward to exploring the education topics relevant to our local public schools this year, starting with these legislative updates led by the Forum's Senior Policy Coordinator, Jennifer Rifkin.
Thank you, Bill. I'm your host for today, Jennifer Rifkin. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into updates on education policy at the state and federal levels, as education has been on the national stage much of this calendar year, with several headlines during the summer. We're joined by education policy experts to get a better understanding of what's changing, what's staying the same, and what's still uncertain. Joining us today, we have Sarah Howell from the Public School Forum of North Carolina, who's the Associate Director of Policy and Research, and Rebecca Shackelford at All for Ed, who is the Director of Federal Government Relations. Rebecca, what are the biggest federal education stories folks may have missed over the summer, and what's the impact on students and schools?
Oh, there are so many. I will highlight two big ones. One of them was over the summer. Usually, the Department of Education releases a lot of money on July 1st. It's really important. Most school years, like their calendar of like fiscally starts July 1st. And then they found out the day before that they weren't getting nearly $7 billion across the country. And this was really important. It's always important money. We need this money, obviously. $7 billion is a lot. It was really focused on after school programs and some summer programs. So that meant that some of those programs had to stop in the middle of the summer, which means working parents and working families were stuck without any option for their kids. There was an attempt to stop the funding for some important groups of students, like English learners and migrant students. So it was a really scary time for schools and for parents. Thankfully, because of a lot of really strong advocacy across the country, like really bipartisan advocacy, we were able to get that money back. But it was a very disruptive moment, and there will be consequences for a long time because any kind of disruption like that really makes a big difference. The other big thing that happened is Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which was a reconciliation bill. A lot of what's in there is about taxes. I don't understand taxes. But what I do understand on the K through 12 education side is that they put in a federal voucher program, and it's a tax credit, a dollar for dollar tax credit for folks that states can opt into. We don't really know what that's going to look like, but we do know that voucher programs are inherently harmful for students. They allow private schools to pick and choose who gets to go to their schools. And the data tells us that every time we bring in a voucher program at the state level, it just makes the cost of that private school go up, and it benefits families who can already afford to send their kids there, and it doesn't benefit students from low-income families, and it certainly doesn't benefit students of color and things like that. So we're very concerned, but we're all trying to figure it out as we go.
Sarah, what are some of the big headlines coming out of this legislative session here in North Carolina? What were our legislators focused on when it comes to education?
It's been a long session, in the truest sense of the word. You know, at the beginning of this legislative session, we were seeing some momentum that we were hoping to see continuation of. So there were some initial proposals to dramatically increase teacher pay across the board, some legislation to address things like mental health issues with students in schools. But unfortunately, we have really seen the focus on the state level shift to bills with a more negative impact on our schools and students. So some of the bills that remain in play include bills aiming to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools, a pair of bills that require cooperation with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And while the statuses of all these different bills are kind of all over the place due to the prolonged nature of this session, we remain in this holding pattern as the General Assembly is coming back together once a month or so to potentially try to override Governor Stein's vetoes of these bills. So, between the diversity, equity, and inclusion ban bills and the bills targeting immigrant families and students, there's this general atmosphere of uncertainty and fear among many in our community. So that's something that we've seen as a result of some of the activity this legislative session. Related to what Rebecca has been speaking about, our legislature did pass a bill to attempt to force North Carolina to opt into this new federal voucher program. And, that was vetoed by the governor as well. We remain waiting to see if they are going to attempt to override that bill, that veto. But, we also remain concerned about the impact that voucher program would have on top of our existing state level voucher program.
Rebecca, in a typical year, what might be happening right now with the federal budgeting process for education, and how is this year different?
I'll be honest, there is no such thing as a typical year in the federal budgeting process. But what is supposed to happen is that by September 30th, we should have a budget for the following fiscal year that starts October 1st. In the past several years, we haven't done it quite on time, but we've been in the process or close. Unfortunately, this year, we're nowhere near close. And we are days away from the end of the fiscal year. And if we don't have something passed, that means that agencies start to shut down. And no one goes to work and no one gets the money that's supposed to get sent out on October 1st. And so it could mean a lot of really devastating things, especially for education. Making sure kids get meals, things like that could be really disrupted. And we're a little scared about what that can mean for our young people.
So, Rebecca, can you also share how the other federal budget cuts are impacting our students and schools at this time?
Yeah, so something that's really complicated is, the federal budget runs on fiscal year cycles. I mean, like most people's budgets run in monthly budgets or something like that. But the thing with the federal budget is that we haven't really updated it in a while, in years, in fact. So we've been operating as if we're in fiscal year 2024, and that fiscal year started a while ago. We're approaching fiscal year 2026. So not only are we spending the same amount, even though our need has grown, the number of kids in schools has grown, I don't know, inflation, things like that, like a dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. So that, of course, has an impact. But on top of that, the current administration has chosen to cancel a lot of really important grants without giving really good reasons. Sometimes from one day to the next, people find out that a critical program, like a mental health program, or a program that, there's a program that in South Bend, Indiana, where kids were building planes and learning how to fly them, which is so incredible, gone. The program will exist, but the impact on those young people will be forever, because it has disrupted it. And they're seniors in high school, and that's happening in North Carolina, it's happening in California, it's happening everywhere. So it means that not only is there less money around, not only do the dollars stop going as far as they used to, now we don't even know if we're getting the dollars.
Sarah, what is the status of the state budget? How is the lack of a state budget impacting schools?
We are without a full state budget. The fiscal year for our state is on a different calendar than the federal calendar. So, on a typical year, and similar to the federal level, we haven't had a typical year in quite a while with North Carolina's budgeting process. But, the goal is always to pass a new state budget for the biennium by July 1st. That did not happen. And there has been, a mini budget, some stopgap funding allocated to ensure that teachers who have state funded positions can move up on the years of experience. So they have a step increase. So that was funded, and then some funding to cover some basic enrollment changes. But when it comes to really critical funding for things like meaningful educator salary increases, funding to sustain important programming for schools, those pieces have not been passed. And so these programs hang in the balance. So where a lot of districts find themselves is in a holding pattern, right? They have to make really critical decisions about, we want to hire an instructional coach to do this, but we also really want to start this new program that provides tutoring after school. And when they don't know what the full state budget might look like, they have to choose instead of potentially fund both things, right? So not only is it less funding, it's also uncertain funding. And so it leaves a lot of programs and instructional opportunities for kids really hanging in the balance. The state budgeting situation compiled with everything Rebecca is describing that we're anticipating coming our way towards the end of this year creates this whole atmosphere where folks just can't get the work done we need to do for kids.
After the break, we'll continue this conversation. Welcome back. In the first half of today's episode, we got caught up on the state of education policy at the federal and state levels. Now, let's take a look at some legislation more specifically. Sarah, have there been any legislative actions to support schools recovering from Helene?
Yeah, so we know that we're just now at about a year since Hurricane Helene. North Carolina official estimates show that there was about $60 billion in damage, and there have been a few rounds of relief funding passed. Governor Stein, as well as other folks in North Carolina, have been in Congress asking for federal funding to support this. The federal funds have fallen far short of what is needed, and state funds have been really falling short of what is needed to meet the need that remains in Western North Carolina. So there has been some action. Just this week, another $65 million was passed to support Helene recovery. But again, with the full bill coming in at around $60 billion, there's a long way to go. And we hope to see more.
Sarah, this year, two bills, HB 318 and SB 153, regarding immigration enforcement were introduced in the General Assembly. Can you talk about the impact of introducing this legislation and the uncertainty around it that has impacted school communities?
This pair of bills, one of which has passed into law and the other which was vetoed but has not yet been overridden by the General Assembly. Together, these two bills in our state are contributing to this overall atmosphere of fear, distrust, uncertainty within the immigrant community in the state. And that shows up on the school level in a lot of really important ways. While our public schools welcome and serve all children, and these bills would not change who has access to enroll or attend public schools, that's really critical. This atmosphere is really causing a lot of families to choose perhaps to keep their kids at home. So we see issues with attendance pop up. Perhaps we see school-wide events get canceled that would draw a lot of folks in from this community that is very vulnerable right now. And perhaps communities are deciding that it's just not worth taking that risk. So we're really seeing this sort of chilling effect in our schools. And all of our students, regardless of their immigration status, are suffering as a result.
Rebecca, another topic that has been a source of uncertainty for many is the federal private school voucher program. How would a program like this work, and what would that look like in practice? What would it mean for public schools? And can you talk a little bit about has North Carolina opted in and what that would look like?
So the short answer is I don't know. And the reason that's the answer is because the way that the bill was written is it's intentionally vague. And we're waiting for regulations and guidelines from the federal government. Surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, those regulations are not coming from the Department of Education, which one would think that would happen. Instead, they're coming from the Department of the Treasury. I'm pretty sure that they don't understand how education works. So it makes it really scary for me, probably for folks out in North Carolina as well, because we're all kind of in a holding pattern right now. What we do know is that it's a tax credit of $1,700 for individuals for their donations to scholarship granting organizations. So in that scenario, you could donate $1,700 to that organization and get a dollar for dollar tax credit on it. Technically, that doesn't mean that your child will then get that $1,700 credit, but we don't really know what's going to happen again because we don't have regulations. What we do know is that states will get to determine what it looks like in their state, and that means that there's some flexibility. So there is the potential to do some things that might not be terrible. So for example, we could possibly use some of the money for after school programs. We can use some of the money for books and course materials. So there's the possibility of it, but we have to be honest, that's not what it's for. It is it was created to give some people access to a tax credit to help them pay for private school that they're already paying for anyway. And what we know, like I said earlier, is that means that those private schools will decide who can go to them and who can't. So that means that if your child has a disability, they might not be welcome. If your child doesn't look like the other kids in that building, they might not be welcome. To the point earlier, our conversation about students with different immigration statuses, they won't be welcome. So it's just really scary because it's really eroding the fabric of our public school system. North Carolina tried to opt in, as Sarah mentioned earlier. Thankfully, your governor vetoed that bill. But I have to be honest, I think it's a when, not an if, for North Carolina and for the other 49 states as well. But it is an opportunity for us to be thinking about, like, how do we create a program that has enough guardrails that protects our kids, because that's the most important thing.
Rebecca, can you also explain the actions that have been taken on diversity, equity, and inclusion by the Department of Education, and what do those actually mean in practice?
A lot of them are very centered around messaging. And what is happening is they're going after programs that they consider to be efforts to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes they have done that using tools, not humans, to look up words within a grant program that a state or a school district has gotten over the years. Some of them that they got during the first Trump administration. So it's just very confusing now. And so what it means is, again, just adding to the instability, because people don't know if tomorrow they're going to get a letter from the Department of Education that says that their grant was canceled, and without many reasons and without a lot of recourse, right? What is happening as a result is that there's been a chilling effect. So some really important programs that really support some of our young people who need the support the most. And I don't mean only students of color. I mean students who are military involved, who move around a lot, who need different kinds of supports, migrant students or children of migrant families. Like, lots of different kinds of people have been affected by this. Young women are affected by this. So, a lot of places where we hadn't seen fill in the blank group of kid, and programs that were designed to allow them to have access to opportunity, to open doors to them, all those doors are getting shut, and it's really scary. And I know that for our educators in the classroom, they have fear because they're worried about what could happen to them and their jobs and their abilities to support their families. But also for districts, they are also worried, like, will they have the money to pay their teachers if they lose blank grant because they used one word in an application for a grant,
So this question's for both of you. Are there any other policy issues at the top of your mind for this school year? Rebecca, we'll start with you.
Something that I've been thinking a lot about is some other things that were in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And those were things around access to healthcare and access to nutrition. And so, as we erode some of those supports for young people, they will have real impacts on our classrooms. So if kids are not healthy, if kids are not fed, they cannot learn. And then we are creating problems where we don't need them to be, instead of investing more in our young people. So I'm very worried about what that will look like in our schools.
As we're sitting here talking about education priorities, both on the federal and the state levels, in North Carolina, our General Assembly has spent plenty of time and money in attempts to send public funds to private schools, right? Both with our existing Opportunity Scholarships program on the state level, and now with this attempt to make us a part of this federal voucher program we keep talking about. We believe in great public schools for all kids, not just good schools for a few. And education has to be accessible to everyone. And we talk about these private schools receiving public funds often, as Rebecca was talking about, certain students are not welcome due to race, class, gender, identity, national, all these components. And privatization of our system really takes us further away from this goal of having an amazing public school system for all kids.
Thank you both for joining us on our segment today. We really appreciate your insights.
Because Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. Congress could not come to a budget resolution by the September 30th deadline, the federal government has shut down as of October 1st, 2025. And on Sunday, September 28th, Education Secretary Linda McMahon published her agency's shutdown contingency plan. The plan allowed for over $22 billion in funding for programs including Title I, Title II, IDEA, and career and technical education to still be dispersed, but it did also call for immediately furloughing nearly 95% of the agency's staff. The plan also states that almost all activity around federal grants and civil rights enforcement will be paused. Head Start may take an almost immediate hit, as the Department of Health and Human Services contingency plan doesn't specifically mention Head Start among programs that will continue uninterrupted. And perhaps one of the biggest impacts of the shutdown from a local perspective is the budget decisions states and counties will have to face as they try to fill in the gaps left by missing federal funding. In North Carolina, this is only compounded by our lack of a state budget. And for updates on both budgets, follow the forum at the NC Forum on all platforms.
After the break, this week's final word from Dr. Bill Harrison.
As we wrap up today's conversation, I can't help but reflect on what all of this policy talks means in practice. For many, discussions about federal budgets, legislative sessions, or policy shifts can feel far removed from the day-to-day life of a school. But for those of us who have served as educators, we know how quickly those decisions, or lack thereof, can ripple down into classrooms. Uncertainty in school funding is not a hypothetical challenge. It is reality that keeps superintendents and school boards awake at night. When I was a superintendent, I can tell you that one of the hardest parts of my job was knowing that every budget line represented people and students. Behind every dollar are children who rely on us for the opportunity and educators who show up every day to make that opportunity real. As the school year began, we were faced with potential federal cuts, the possibility of shutdowns, and the introduction of new policies that leave districts scrambling to interpret what comes next. In such moments, leaders are focused into impossible choices. Do we preserve the teaching positions that reduce class sizes? Or do we hold on to programs like the arts, STEM, or extracurricular activities that keep so many students engaged in school? Do we cut back on mental health supports, even though we know students need them more? Or do we risk losing talented staff who deserve fair pay? These are not easy choices, and the truth is there are no perfect answers. But I can tell you the instability and unpredictability are themselves harmful. Schools thrive when they can plan, when they can set a course for students and staff with some confidence about the resources that will be there to support them. When that ground shifts constantly, we all pay the price. And here's something I hope we all carry forward. When the budget picture gets cloudy, it's not just numbers at stake. It's children. Children who may lose a counselor they trust. Children whose classrooms grow too large for them to get the attention they need. Children whose schools may lose the very programs that make them excited to walk through the doors every morning. As a state and as a nation, we have to decide what kind of commitment we are willing to make. Local public schools cannot be treated as a political bargaining chip when education is the foundation of our democracy and the gateway to opportunity for every child. So as the school year unfolds and as policymakers at every level make decisions that affect classrooms, I encourage all of us to stay engaged, to raise our voices, and to keep students at the center of the conversation. Because at the end of the day, every budget is a value statement. And I believe our children deserve to see in that statement a clear commitment to their success. Thank you for taking time with us to learn and think about education. That's all for today, and we'll see you next week.